Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And he found in the temple those who sold oxen and sheep and doves, and money changers doing business. When he had made a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple, with the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money, and overturned the tables. And he said to those who sold doves, "Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise." And his disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house has eaten me up." So the Jews answered and said to him, "What sign do you show to us since you do these things?" Jesus answered and said to them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Then the Jews said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. In the previous study, we considered the tabernacle of Moses, consisting of the temple of God, surrounded by the outer court. We should always recognize that the outer court is not the same as the temple. As shown, the spiritual reality of the 3 areas is the called and chosen and faithful, or soul, mind, and spirit. In Revelation 11:1 and 2, John is told to measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship there, meaning that John is to establish the criterion for judgment and vindication. This criterion is the message of the cross, the principle of self-sacrifice, never more exemplified than by Jesus Christ and the apostles of the early church. So, when the 7th seal is opened, the angel takes the golden censer from the altar of incense, fills it with fire from the brazen altar, and along with the incense and prayers of the saints, cast it into the earth. The fire from the brazen altar denotes the message of the cross, also seen as the lake of fire or second death in Revelation. This sets the sounding of the trumpets in motion, which is the fulfilling of the 7 prophecies to the 7 churches. The earth it is cast into denotes this carnal realm in which all of us abide. In John 2, Jesus enters the temple, driving out those selling oxen, sheep, and doves. Matthew records this just a little differently. Then Jesus went into the temple of God and drove out all those who bought and sold in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. Jesus drove out all those who bought and sold in the temple. Might this connect to the buy or sell in Revelation 13:17, pointing to the idea that we have turned the gospel of Christ into a non-profit, profit-making institution, and this very shortly after the rise of the early New Testament church? Note what Paul says in the following: "But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. But you, O man of God, flee these things, and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, gentleness." In the Lord's time, it was a literal stone temple with people selling actual animals and birds. In this day and age, his temple is his people, and the buy and sell points to what we give in exchange for our souls. Following his actions in the temple, Jesus makes a significant statement in response to the Jews saying, "What sign do you show us since you do these things?" What does Jesus say? "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Friend, the temple that needs raising is not one of brick or stone, but of people. The prophecies to the churches indicate that we would fall away. This has certainly been the case. How can we argue this, since it is prophecy from the Lord himself? 3 days. Literal days when applied to his death, burial, and resurrection, but spiritual when applied to us. Now, let me share the following illustration showing the spiritual equivalent of the 3 days. Here we have an illustration of the golden lampstand that stood in the holy place of the tabernacle, consisting of 7 branches. The instructions for the making of this lampstand are in Exodus chapter 25, verses 31 through 40. The lampstand works perfectly to illustrate the last days, which began on the day of Pentecost and continues up to this present time. As shown, these are not literal 24-hour days, but the spiritual fulfillment of the day of Pentecost, followed by the 3 days of the Feast of Tabernacles. Since there is light on each branch, they represent a day, while the spaces represent the corresponding night that goes with each day. The space or night following the day of Pentecost represents the falling away of his living temple, which began in the 1st century. It's not without significance that the last days incorporate the 3rd through the 6th months, totaling 18, the number of oppression or bondage. The 3 days Jesus refers to in John 2:19 is the spiritual fulfillment of the Feast of Tabernacles. For more on this, I would point you to my series on the last days. The day when the Son of Man is revealed, synonymous with the coming of the Son of Man. Many believe this coming refers to the second coming of Christ, but this cannot be the case, since these days are, as the days of Noah and Lot, where we are challenged by the message of the cross. Now, before I close this study, let me give you some food for thought regarding the days of Noah and Lot. With the days of Noah, we're told they ate, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage. With the days of Lot, we read, they ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built. Is this just a way of saying business as usual? Or might there be more to this than what first meets the eye? Ate and drank, literal or figurative. Didn't Jesus say, whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day? With ate and drank in mind, look at what Jesus said. But if that evil servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming, and begins to beat his fellow servants, and to eat and drink with the drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he is not looking for him, and at an hour that he is not aware of, and will cut him in two, and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. They married wives and were given in marriage. And what Jesus told the Sadducees, who deny that there is a resurrection. Jesus answered and said to them, the sons of this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are counted worthy to attain that age and the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. They bought and sold. Look at Matthew 21:12 again. That Jesus went into the temple of God and drove out all those who bought and sold in the temple. They planted and built. I cannot help but think of the following regarding Babel. And they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. I get the impression that in Matthew 24 and Luke 17, the Lord is not talking about the world at all, but about his people. Can we confirm this? Yes. For in Matthew 24:45 through 51, Jesus speaks of the faithful and wise servant as opposed to the evil servant who is given his portion with the hypocrites. What did Jesus call the religious leaders in Matthew 23? Hypocrites. And that 7 times.